So today's question is, do vegetarians or vegans live longer? Let's get into it right now. Okay, so the reason that we're talking about this today is I posted this picture right here on my social media. And it wasn't even on one of my main groups that I have for carnivore diet or anything. It was just on my personal timeline. And it definitely sparked some controversy. I actually got attacked for putting up this ad. I was accused of denigrating vegetarians and vegans and attacking them and that kind of thing, which I didn't even add any text to this other than the word interesting. That's all I said. And it definitely sparked a big debate and actually created some hard feelings amongst people I thought were friends, and maybe they still will be later down the road when things settle out, but that's neither here nor there. I obviously realized that it's a pretty touchy subject, and I'm not sure exactly why some people viewed this as a personal attack against them. But this isn't the first time I've had people come at me about talking about the carnivore diet. Now, this isn't exactly talking about the carnivore diet, this particular picture, but it was I think it was the third in a series of pictures I had put out from other celebrities talking about the fact that they had been vegan, got sick, and switched back to meat and got better. So I guess I can see why some people might view that as attacking them, I suppose, if they're really ultra sensitive. I'm wondering if they're so secure in their way of life, why do they feel that this is such a threat to them? So now that we've established kind of why we're talking about this, let's dig into it. One of the quotes that was given to me was that Seventh-day Adventists have a 7-year longer lifespan because they're vegetarian. So if you actually do this search, do Seventh-day Adventists live longer, you'll see a whole ton of articles, most of which are actually sponsored by or paid for by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, interestingly enough. And they actually sponsor a lot of research at places like Harvard University and things like that. When an organization of any kind that has a vested interest in an outcome from a study, and they're paying lots of people to do these studies, I tend to take those studies with a very large grain of salt. So here's one of the articles. Now, all these articles that I'm going to show you today, as well as a video I'm going to show you, will be in the show notes down in the description. So you can look them up for yourself so that you know I'm not just blowing smoke. The key part of this paragraph here is findings estimated that men in this particular group lived 7.3 years longer, and women 4.4 years longer, for an average of 6.1 years longer. Fair enough. However, there's some things that they're not talking about here, and we'll get into that in a second. So I thought, are there other groups of people that have the same results but different diets? And it just so happens that I belong to a church called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, more commonly known amongst the masses as Mormons. And we have something called the Word of Wisdom. So if you do the same search for do Mormons live longer, I use that instead of the church's proper name because that's what most of the articles use, because it's shorter and easier. And then there's an article here that says that this lifestyle translated in up to an extra 9.8 years of life. So this is, almost 3 years longer, or actually it's over 3 years longer of lifespan on average. We actually eat meat. So that kind of leads me to suspect that maybe, just being vegetarian isn't what's completely responsible for that extra 7 years of life on average that the Seventh-day Adventists enjoy, and possibly, other vegetarians and vegans. Although there's some debate about that as well, but we'll get into that in a minute. Here are some of the things that are different about members of our church that contribute to this extra longevity. Now, of course, not everyone in the church is married, but it's very central to the church's ideals is to get married and have a family. And now I personally, I left the church. I was raised in the church. I left the church for quite a few years, and then I came back. So, that says here that, most of them never smoked, which is true. I did for quite a few years, very heavily, as a matter of fact. Attend church weekly. So that's something I do now, of course. Didn't when I had left the church. At least 12 years of education. Now, I quit high school in middle of grade 11, but then I went back afterwards for some computer training. I was already really good at computers. I just needed a piece of paper to be able to show prospective employers. Church members tend to have a moderate body mass index. They participate in regular physical activity, if they're able. And we tend to get proper sleep. There's a lot of factors in here. And a lot of these factors are going to be the same for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They have a lot of the same things. They're all about marriage and family and going to church and being spiritual. And just the fact of going to church, having that community and being spiritual, that all actually contributes to mental health, lower stress levels, which means lower cortisol levels, which means less inflammation in the body. And this is all very helpful. They're also known for never having smoked, and they have a more normal body weight. They exercise more often. And of course, they're following the vegetarian diet. And they're eating nuts more frequently. There's some other factors involved here other than just being vegetarian. Okay. The thing that people aren't realizing is that these comparisons, they're not compared to carnivores or even strict keto diets. They're not comparing it to that. They're comparing it to people that eat a standard American diet, which means tons of ultra-processed foods, tons of sugar, grains, carbohydrates, as well as, vegetables and stuff. And, the standard American diet, they are urged to not eat meat, especially fatty meat. So, they're really pushed towards eating lean meat, that kind of thing. And that all has a significant effect, because when you're not eating all these other bad things, you're going to be a lot healthier than people that are on the standard American diet. So this is what they're comparing it to. They're not comparing it to carnivore, yet all the time I get these arguments put to me that, Seventh-day Adventists live much longer, or vegetarians live longer, or vegans tend to live longer or are healthier. Well, the reason that vegans will often get healthier when they switch to being vegan, same with vegetarians, is typically people that are going onto those diets are also giving up all of these other harmful foods. All the sugars and the processed foods and the seed oils and all that kind of thing. They're giving all that up as well, and they're creating a healthier lifestyle. To say that it's only the meat that was making them sick is completely unfair and completely inaccurate. And unfortunately, there's some studies out there that kind of do the same thing, and they should be illegal because they're completely false. So we're going to get into some dietary recommendations here. So this is now I've actually linked to this article previously in another video. I did a video called "Is High LDL Cholesterol Dangerous?" or "Is High Cholesterol Dangerous?" I think that's what I called the video. And I actually have 5 articles linked in there that you can look up that go into more detail, specifically around cholesterol. So one of the main things that vegetarians and vegans point to for health concerns is, they tell us that eating fatty meat and high cholesterol causes heart disease and shortens one's life. Well, the fact of the matter is there are tons of new studies out there that have been done in the last 10 or so years, and more coming out every month. There's new studies coming out that actually show that is completely false. A lot of those studies were based on epidemiological studies, which basically they look at statistics amongst wide populations of people and then draw conclusions and correlations. But you can make the most ridiculous correlations from these sets of data. You can make any kind of conclusions that you want and support it with these ridiculous associations. But none of this is proven. Epidemiological studies are known to have many flaws and issues. They don't actually prove cause and effect. Now, they can be helpful in designing tests and studies so that you can look into these cause and effect issues, but in and of themselves, they prove absolutely nothing. So they can't be relied upon. And in the past, I'm not going to get into this too much, but in the past, there has been some actual collusion going on where big companies, especially companies that produce a lot of sugar and sugary products, and associations that built up around them, actually paid people to falsify research. Now, I'm not going to really get into that in any more detail here, but it's easy to find that information if you go and do some research on it. And actually, the doctor that's in the video I'm going to show you near the end of this, he's got a whole ton of information about that on his YouTube channel. He gets into it in quite detail. This study right here actually shows that a low-carb diet is very beneficial for preventing heart disease. And the only way you can do a low-carb diet is when you're eating a lot of meat. That's kind of interesting in and of itself. But that by itself, that addresses the issue with the cholesterol, which is kind of the main focus of a lot of these people that talk about how dangerous meat is. Next, I'm going to show you some studies about reversing autoimmune disorders and some of the papers that were written on it and the testing that they used. So most of this testing was done with something called an elemental diet. So they were testing people with such severe autoimmune issues that they couldn't even just eat normally. So what the elemental diet is it actually gives you like a liquid diet through a tube through the nose, or maybe a tube directly to the stomach from outside. There's some different ways that can be accomplished. An elemental diet is a diet that proposes the ingestion, or in more severe cases, use of a gastric feeding tube or intravenous feeding of liquid nutrients in an easily assimilated form. It is usually composed of amino acids, fats, sugars, vitamins, and minerals. This diet, however, lacks whole or partial protein due to its ability to cause an allergic reaction in some people. So they weren't actually giving them meat in the cases of these studies, but they were eliminating all the other bad stuff that people eat that cause issues with autoimmune. So if we look at this article here, so elemental diet is a primary treatment of acute Crohn's disease, a controlled trial. Now, Crohn's disease, I'm not sure if you know what it is. You can look it up. But it's a severe issue with the gastrointestinal tract that causes all kinds of bloating and cramping and oftentimes bleeding, and makes life just absolutely miserable for people that suffer from it. Just a quick abstract from the results of this study, they found that elemental diet is a safe and effective treatment for acute Crohn's disease. Pretty simple. And we have another one here, remission induced by an elemental diet in small bowel Crohn's disease. And it says in the abstract, the elemental diet was equally effective in inducing an improvement in Lloyd-Still disease activity index. So erythrocyte sedimentation rate and C-reactive protein and albumin concentrations and body weight as a high-dose steroid regimen. So high-dose steroid regimen is the traditional treatment, but they found that an elemental diet was just as effective as those huge amounts of medications, which come with their own set of problems, by the way. So here we have another study, a controlled trial of polymeric versus elemental diet in treatment of active Crohn's disease. Now, I didn't actually look up what a polymeric diet was. I should have done that, but it's something that's easy enough to look up for yourself. Polymeric diets do not seem to offer an effective therapeutic alternative to elemental diets in patients with acute exacerbations of Crohn's disease. And here we have another one. So Crohn's disease, maintenance of remission by diet. So once you've achieved remission, this is the diet they've shown that can maintain that remission. Here we have 7 out of the 10 patients on the exclusion diet remained in remission for 6 months, compared with none out of the 10 on an unrefined carbohydrate fiber-rich diet. So that last little bit there, unrefined carbohydrate fiber-rich diet, that's a lot of what is in the traditional standard American diet, although standard American diet also adds, ultra refined grains and, of course, the vegetable oils, which are really, really super bad for you. Despite what some of the supposed research out there says, there's quite a bit of research out there bought and paid for by, sources that really shouldn't be paying for this kind of stuff and have us expect to trust the results. You have to look at studies in the bigger picture. You have to take a look at not what the study is saying per se, but who paid for the studies, who benefits from the studies. And unfortunately, in this day and age, there is an awful lot of corruption. The last couple of years, there's been a huge controversy, even in the peer-reviewed study space, where it was found that some companies were paying these people that are involved on the peer-reviewed boards, were actually paying them to give positive reviews of studies that should have never happened. It's a real minefield out there to try and find the actual truth. And the unfortunate side of it is that, these types of corrupted studies and just wrong studies and epidemiological studies that they're using to base some of this stuff on, they go back to the 50s and 60s and some really bad ones in the 70s that caused the government to support this low fat, low meat diet. What they've been discovering recently is that that type of diet is actually harmful. But it was passed along as fact for so long, so many people are almost brainwashed into believing it, and they just can't accept anything else, regardless of the evidence you put in front of them. It's unfortunate, but it's just the reality of the situation. So here we have another article here. So this is the low carbohydrate diet. Are concerns with saturated fats, lipids, and cardiovascular disease risk justified? So this is another one of those articles that are dealing specifically with the cholesterol side of keto or carnivore diets. And it's quite a good article. Now, keep in mind, some of these articles are pretty technical, so you might want to have a dictionary sitting beside you, or Google handy so you can look stuff up. So it's a little bit of work to go through these studies and figure out exactly what they're trying to tell us, but I think it's important to do that, especially if you're someone that suffers from chronic disease or autoimmune disease or obesity or combinations of the above. So just to give a little context, if you haven't watched other videos on my channel, I've been carnivore since January 16th, and previously I was keto, and I was morbidly obese. I'm 6'3", and I weighed at one point 540 pounds. Yeah, that I was pretty bad shape, but I also had some severe autoimmune diseases. I was bedridden for 10 years. When I started getting off the medications and went on keto and did some other things, I started getting a little healthier, and I lost quite a bit of weight using keto. And then when I stalled out, couldn't lose any more weight with keto, I was doing more research and I discovered the carnivore diet. Now, previous to going on carnivore, I still had lots of issues with autoimmune disease. So the worst of the autoimmune diseases I have is called myasthenia gravis. But I've also got ankylosing spondylitis, Sjogren's disease, I've got spinal stenosis, I've got osteoarthritis, and I've got some autoimmune-based skin diseases as well. Myasthenia gravis causes severe muscle weakness. That was part of the reason I was bedridden, because I didn't have the strength to walk. I mean, I could get around. Once I had stabilized, I'd had some surgery that was supposed to help stabilize the disease, called a thymectomy, and that did stabilize things. But I was still on pretty heavy medications, and even with that, I could walk around the apartment to get to the bathroom and that, but not very well, and I often needed help. I couldn't shower or bathe myself. I had to have assistance for quite some time. I was in constant pain from the chronic disease. I also have chronic pain from back injuries. So even though the autoimmune stuff has gone away now that I've been carnivore for a few months, I still have issues with my back that I have to deal with. Having said that, I've got this little snippet of video I want to play for you. And I'll leave a link down in the description as well, so you can go watch the whole video. But just a little background here, Dr. Dr. Chaffee is a neurosurgeon, and he's also been involved in some research on carnivore diet. He initially started carnivore diet over 22 years ago, and then when he moved to England for a while, he kind of started cheating on the diet for the few years he was there. It was harder to get the strict carnivore stuff, especially when he was eating out in restaurants and stuff. And he tells us that, he noticed a big difference. He started having a few little health issues, and he was losing some of his strength and endurance and energy levels. And when he went back on strict carnivore, his health immediately got better. So out of the last 22 years, he's been carnivore, I believe, over a decade. And there are actually quite a list of doctors out there that have been carnivore for many years as well. And Dr. Chaffee actually did an interview with a woman from the interior of British Columbia, Canada. She's a rancher, her and her husband, and she's been carnivore over 65 years. And her husband's carnivore, her children are carnivore. She raised her children carnivore. She was carnivore when she was breastfeeding, and they all turned out very, very healthy. And it's interesting in the video because when you watch that video, she's like 81 years old, and you wouldn't think she's over 45 or 50. And she's still out there physically working side by side with her husband on the ranch, along with the ranch hands. It's not like being carnivore made her sick, like so many other people try to convince us will happen if we're eating nothing but fatty meat. So I'm going to play a little snippet here, and he's addressing specifically autoimmune disease being reversed by a carnivore diet.
Specifically with autoimmune disorders, Dr. Salisbury found that you could cure, C-U-R-E, cure, things like Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, gout, by putting people on a pure red meat and water diet. Okay, this is well documented. He wrote his book. There's been many scientific publications in peer-reviewed journals for decades, maybe even a full century. Even as recently as 1975, there was a book called The Stone Age Diet that basically argued the exact same thing. He was a gastroenterologist, and he said, look, all these diseases that I treat, you don't need me as long as you eat meat and only eat meat. Okay. Then 1980, all the recommendations came around saying don't eat meat anymore, cholesterol causes heart disease, everything we knew about all of these diseases.
Okay, don't really need to play any more of that. Like I said, I'll link it down in the description and you can watch the whole video for yourself. Another video that he does that is very interesting that I really recommend people to watch. It's titled, Plants Are Trying to Kill You. And he goes over all the issues that there are with plants that people are eating these days. One example he gives is they actually tested these different vegetables to see what kind of chemicals they had in them. And Brussels sprouts, for instance, they found 136 known cancer-causing chemicals. Known to cause cancer in humans. And that's just one example. He gives quite a few. So that was a very eye-opening video for me to watch. If you look elsewhere on my channel, I've actually got a playlist that's labeled research. There is over 60 videos in that playlist. And most of those videos are from doctors, scientists, and researchers. There's a couple of documentaries thrown in. And many of those videos have links to the actual research papers that they talk about in the videos. The ones that don't, they talk about what those research projects are called, so you can look them up yourself if you want to do that. Hopefully, I've answered the question about do vegetarians or vegans live longer? The answer in many cases is yes, they live longer than the regular population that are eating the standard American diet. But they do not live longer than carnivores. But they've never done the research to actually prove that. They just keep citing this stuff about, oh, they live longer than the rest of the population. But they're not actually doing a comparison between being vegetarian and being strict carnivore or strict keto. They don't do those studies. And there's a reason that they don't do those studies. I'll let you decide what that reason might be. You can draw your own conclusions on that. Now, I just want to say quickly, there will be a disclaimer that popped up right at the beginning of the video. If you didn't stop and read it, I want you to go back and actually read that disclaimer. But in a nutshell, that disclaimer says that I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not medically trained in any way. I'm just someone who has fought all of my life with chronic diseases of one kind or another. And it's been a long struggle, and I've had long periods in my life where I was extremely unhealthy, and a few times I've been close to death because of those different chronic diseases. All of this has gone away since I've gone to a strict carnivore diet. But I'm not telling you that it's the only answer. It was the answer for me. It's the answer for thousands of other people. And there's lots of medical research out there that actually supports it. But a lot of that medical research that supports it is completely ignored by mainstream media and sometimes even actively suppressed. This is part of the problem. There is a lot of financial interest involved around these highly processed foods that are produced by these big corporations. And it's not just the food companies that are involved in this. The whole medical profession as a whole has kind of turned into this system where they make a lot of money when you're sick. And they've really segmented things so they don't look at the reasons behind why you're sick in most instances. They're more interested in treating a very specific, narrow issue, and they're trained to deal with that narrow issue. And the pharmaceutical companies, of course, make billions and billions of dollars every year off all the medications that these same doctors are recommending to you. That's just kind of the unfortunate side of it. And these huge food companies, of course, are making gigantic profits on these ultra-processed foods that they can pump out in huge quantities and sell to people really cheap. And they've even, done lots of lobbying and paid for false testing and that kind of thing to back up what they're saying so that they get approved by the USDA and put on food stamp programs so that these foods are being fed to the military, school children, prison populations, people on welfare that are using food stamps. That's a lot of the reason behind all of this and why it is going to take a long time to change it. And there are interests out there that are attacking the whole carnivore and keto lifestyle. They're trying to outlaw meat, and they're putting on ridiculous taxes saying that, cows are producing all this methane gas that's causing issues with the environment. It's destroying the environment, which of course, if you actually look at what they're saying, it doesn't. Now I encourage you to watch another video I've got on my channel. So I just actually changed the name of it. It used to be called Ethics of Carnivore, but now I've renamed it to Debunking Vegan Myths. We cover the whole thing about the environment, climate change, and we also cover quite a few other things in there. The ethics of actually eating meat compared to being vegan or vegetarian. So it's a very well researched video. It took me a lot of time to do the research and put that video together. I think it's well worth the watch. So I'll link that down in the description as well, so you can check that out. If I remember, I'll actually add it to one of the cards at the end. So if you found this video useful today, please hit like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you're sure to find the future videos that we put out. Now, on this channel, we do a lot of other things. We do some recipes in there, and I do some vlogs on my progress. Helps keep me honest and shares with you how I'm doing and how I'm doing it. I appreciate you being here today. I love having you hang out with us. See you on the next video. Bye for now.